Timber Talks is brought to you by Wood Solutions. Stay up to date with the latest in timber, the building material that is strong, safe and sustainable. Here is your host, Adam Jones.
Welcome everybody to this third instalment of this four-part series where we're going back through the Wood Solutions Timber Talks archives and getting all of the best content and snipping them around certain themes. And today's theme we're looking at is the case studies. Now, we've been very lucky. We really have had the world-leading case studies on timber projects. So in this episode, you're going to be hearing from commercial office projects, hotels, building extensions, lightweight timber frame, CLT, the whole gamut. First off, we'll be looking at commercial office building, and the number one case study we'll be looking at is International House and Daramu House, where we'll be hearing from Jonathan Evans, who's the director of Tzannes Architects, and Karl-Heinz, the former GM at Lend-Lease Design Make. Following that, we'll hear about 25 King Street from Basil Richardson, who's a studio director at Bates Smart. Got coming up is C1, which is the big sister, so to speak, of International House.
Yep.
What past learnings from previous projects you've had can you take away going into this project?
Oh, there were so many lessons learned on International House. Again, the first time of doing anything takes a lot of pre-planning, a lot of thought, but it doesn't always eventuate. So the lessons learnt have been considerable and a lot of them unexpected. But it's formed a real platform now to sort of launch further. So the ambition with the big sister, it is 50% longer building. It's the same height because that's dictated with the master plan. But as a 50% larger building, the ambition is to build it in the same time frame as C2. So that kind of level of improvements just in the one project. We are, again, taking confidence in what was achieved with International House and taking it further. For instance, the column grid in the first project is a 6 by 9 metre grid, and that's a very efficient CLT span. In the next building, we're pushing that to a 9 by 9 metre grid. Again, first in the world. So we did have a discussion with Lend-Lease, should we just do a twin sister? Just, we've learnt the lessons, let's just kind of rely on those and just do same again, same, but different. But we thought we're in this such acceleration of learning and innovation, let's keep learning and keep investigating how far timber fabrication can go. And again, this is a step, it's certainly not the end point, and the third sister, again, if there is one, we'll be pushing it again because it really is in its infancy of commercial buildings anyway. And Lend-Lease and ourselves really thought it important to keep pushing the boundary, go for a larger grid, a different structural system. But again, we pulled out the old matrix and sort of re-investigated number of lifts, volume of timber, foundation weights, number of connections, all of those feeds into the eventual success of the building and the speed of construction and the ultimate cost of the building. So all of that has been taken to the next level, and we see there's still further to go in the efficiencies and just maximising every single benefit of prefabrication has to offer.
Yeah. So if you look into some of the numbers on C1, which is the big sister building. He said it's 50% larger in terms of floor area, but it will be built at the same time frame, which means we have to accelerate productivity quite significantly. And one of the parameters we have been looking into is actually number of components. And a 9 by 9 grid is actually reducing the number of components. Because you've got a bigger grid, that means that you've got fewer columns and beams. And now we looked into a different floor system as a rib deck instead of just a pure CLT structure, which takes the secondary beams more or less out, and they will be already prefabricated to the slab, attached to the slab, and then brought to site. So there is already quite an improvement and step change there.
Yeah, so it's really going back to first principles again, even though it could have just been same. We sort of, we got round again, teamwork as the group who had delivered the previous building and sort of went through all of the lessons learned and improvements that were identified as we went and opportunities that were missed on C2 because they just weren't realised. But having built it, all of those benefits were then recognised and are embedded in the next building, and I'm sure we'll learn more lessons. One of the exciting ones is the lift shafts, as I mentioned, are all timber. But in International House, that's not appreciated. In construction, you could stand at the bottom of a lift shaft and look up 7 stories of timber. However, you walk into the lift and you don't appreciate that. There's only the construction team who's ever seen that. So in the next building, we're actually putting in glass lifts and glass facade to Scotch Row, which is the laneway at the back. So you can actually sort of experience this 7-story shaft of timber walling as you sort of move up and down the building. And even from the outside as a passerby, you can sort of look in and see that sort of quite dramatic element, but also then start to appreciate that this really is a structural timber authentic building, not just a veneer of timber.
Well, I think some of the lessons is just working with the efficiencies of timber. We're very familiar with the inherent efficiencies in concrete and what works well. And what you need to do is assess your initial planning and your constraints within timber, and to determine just what works best for you. We determined what worked best for this project, and it's like any project. You need to take that initial step and determine how it will most effectively serve your project. Timber for an office building is much different than timber for residential or timber for a retail environment. You really, in an office building, you have the freedom of having a full open space and having everything supported by columns. Projects that we're doing that are residential more have the CLT that are acting as the walls and the floor slab, so that you have an integration between the two of those, but it's a much different structural system.
And is the acoustic requirements different as well for an office building compared to an apartment building?
They are different. So with an office, we probably have a little bit of a higher level of flexibility, I should say, not a higher acoustic requirements. But with residential, you really worry a bit more about the impact on noise floor to floor, and you need to have something that mitigates that a bit more. Whereas the benefit of commercial is that you can really expose everything. You really have the ability to have just a lesser layer on the top and live with a bit more noise that's common in an office environment.
The next case study we're going to look at is 55 Southbank Boulevard. Here we're going to be hearing from Julian Anderson, a director at Bates Smart, Rob de Brincat, the business development manager at Icon, and finally Nathan Benbow, an associate at Vistek.
Yeah, if I start, look, I think for us it's really being in a position now where I'd say we've sort of reached a critical mass. We know at Bates Smart enough about timber buildings to say to a client, have you considered timber as a solution, and this is what it might look like and this is what it might mean for you, and we know who in the industry can help you realise this vision. So I think it's just this comfort that as Nathan and Rob have been talking about, that timber isn't the ideal solution, but I think we now know when we can use timber. So I think that's very exciting for us, and it's led us to introduce clients to projects using timber that they would not otherwise have contemplated. And there's a couple that we're doing now that wouldn't have happened without the knowledge that we'd gained on 55 Southbank Boulevard in our office building in 25 King Street. So that feels like a big contribution that we're making at Bates Smart, because we know that putting a sustainability hat on, that the construction industry contributes to a sort of somewhere between 30 and 40% of the world's carbon emissions. And you say these buildings are amazing because the timber, for example, in 55 Southbank Boulevard, sequestering about 5,500 tonnes of carbon dioxide. So you say, actually, we're making a real contribution. That aspect of the building is not carbon neutral, it's carbon negative. So that's the thing that excites us, and then being at the forefront of pushing that technology and actually contributing to shaping those outcomes with the client, rather than the traditional architect-client relationship where a client will come and develop a brief with us. So I think we're pretty excited by that aspect of the project and timber.
Yeah, look, from my perspective, the devil's in the detail, and I've been working this space for a while now. But when you actually need to start delivering projects from a builder's perspective, everything comes to the surface. You need to resolve everything. In construction, you just can't sweep things under the carpet. So for me, the biggest learning on this is the details and what needs to be resolved, what needs to be discussed, and at what point during the design process, the procurement process, letting of subcontracts or suppliers, those decisions need to be made, and the support that we need from consultants as well as subcontractors. So that's been the biggest learning curve. And look, there's plenty of solutions out there in the market, and I think this is where a lot of the IP discussion comes in to really work out how you manage those. So for anyone out there who's looking to build a CLT or mass timber structure, look, it's definitely achievable. There's so many solutions out there. But the word of advice is to really start digging deep into the details as early as you possibly can to bring them out to the surface so you can generate the best solution for the project.
Yeah, mine's quite similar to Rob's, but essentially coordination between everyone is really important, particularly in the modelling stage. So you've got CLT, shop drawings happening, steel core shop drawings, and coordinating those along with the connection details to make sure that it's actually going to go together correctly, but also behave as designed. I think that's crucial.
Next, we're going to look at two different international case studies. First of all, Arbora at the time was the world's largest CLT project by volume. Now it's number 2. We'll be hearing from Keven Durand, who's a project manager at Nordic Structures. And following that, HoHo Vienna, which is the world's tallest timber building, with Richard Woschitz, who's a director at the Woschitz Group. Moving on now to the structural engineering. What's the importance of replication in your design and simplicity?
Well, we try as much as possible because we are a designer and also a manufacturer. So we know exactly how it is going to be fabricated. So all the column-to-column details are the same. Even if the columns get shorter, we add the same detail for each floors. It's the same beam height, same column sizes per floor, same slab. We had exterior terrace where we have a particular, we have a different thickness, than the interior one, but it's all 175 millimeters, the slab. The shear wall also are all the same, but after 2 levels we get from 7 plies to 5 ply. But they are double beam next to the column, so they are all spaced with the same gap. Where we could have difficulties with replication is when we came to the masonry. So every time we turn, or there's a different angles, and the balcony are also triangular balcony with Bicista rod system on one side. So that leads to we were able to have replication, for example, level, I think it's 6 or 5 to 7, maybe 5 to 7. We had lots of details that are the same, but these balconies are only at level 5 to level 4 to 8, and it's not the case for the first 2 levels. So yeah, these location that was different, and sometimes we had different type of balconies that these triangular one, and the C phase there's a concave corner where it's another type of balcony. So yeah, for balconies and bricks, lots of times of coordination on our side. I would say out of through one set now, I would say the same times as the design maybe of the building, just coordination of balconies and bricks. And also with the openings, we did the best we can, and with the phase C actually, because we had the same partners from phase A. Everybody involved, mechanical, fireman, the sprinkler guy, and the electricity guy, they were aware of what was coming because that was their third project. So we were able to limit at 5 or 6 similar openings that are maybe over-designed at some location, maybe a few more reinforcing screws. But at the end, we had only few openings for the whole project. And we told these guys that we told them first, where do you want pipes to get through the beams? And then we draw these openings, and they were reserved, I would say, for them. But the dimension was fixed and location was fixed almost over the height of the building. So that, because otherwise it's an endless process.
And you mentioned simplicity. Can you talk a little bit more about how you design the building so it could be more simple, maybe in the decisions about connections?
The connections is very easy because you have only one details, and the details was on a section point that you put the columns, and then we get the beams, and on the beams we get the ceilings elements, and this connected very easy so that we can need only a grout, but not a metal, connection.
So for the developer at the start of this project, was this going to be more expensive or less expensive than, say, traditional construction? And if it is more expensive, why did they choose timber for this project?
We want to find a pilot project to make a point for the future on this place, and obviously the developer says, how can we find some special idea? Can it be make a special project like with the architecture? But you just know we must find much more. And then he makes the idea, or he want to make this building in a wood or in a hybrid wood construction. Sustainability is one of the point who says to the owner to gives a chance for build these big projects with the material wood, and it is one of the point. And next one, how can we work very faster on the building side, and you can just do it when you make much more prefabricated great elements. And this was just the second reason that says the developer, yes, we do this in this art of conception.
So let's talk about the speed of construction. How quickly did you build this building per floor?
Yes, we do this very quickly because we can take 1 week, 1 floor, and the HoHo, you must say, there are 5 blocks, and with 2 blocks we start in the year 2017, and I'm very interested for the Lego principle, and because I find it very, very good, because you take one bricks to another. And I also told this example, please give a child some Lego bricks and told him, please make some skyscrapers, and he will begin to work, take one bricks to another, and then he will look at maybe 20 centimeters or 30 centimeters. Oh, it looks instability in one direction. And what does she do? He turn around 90 degrees and also start with the second system. and so easy this works, so easy. This was one of the idea from our construction principle, and we do this also very fast inside, so we can finish this in always one store in 1 week. And before we start with the assembling, all people must be much faster and faster and faster. Like they was very, very fast on the 24 stores.
Yeah, they keep learning.
Keep learning and keep learning the process between the prefabricated, the logistic and transport. And this was one of the best learning from all people.
Next, we have James Fitzpatrick, who's a partner at Fitzpatrick and Partners on the Seedhouse, which won the 2020 Timber Design Awards. And the building's finished now. It's one of the best massive timber projects within Australia, no doubt. What are some of the lessons learned through this whole design and construction process of your forever home?
The detail takes time. I think that's one of the key ones, and it takes people to have the right attitude. It's like we all think we can pick up and do those little home projects, and it's interesting just over this Easter break trying a few projects myself again here at home, and it's where you think your skills are and you know that the technical way to do things, but it's very different between technically knowing how to do it and physically being able to do it. So it's having those people around you that are experienced, have spent those years on the tools, but have a passion for what they do, and then not telling them what to do, but working with them to achieve the best outcome. So I think some of the nicest details of the home were actually resolved from working with the people that are actually going to build the details. I think it's really important to actually not become the person that dictates the solution, but actually listen to the people that have those technical skills and years of practical skills, and listen to how they would put it together, how they would build something. And by working together, taking a bit of what they give, them taking a bit of what you can offer, and meeting somewhere in the middle, you get a lot better resolved detail. And that love and care will then come through, because then they are passionate about achieving the best outcome of what they were part of the concept for, part of the idea before. So that really does come through.
The next case study we'll look at is Latrobe University student accommodation, and we'll be hearing from Danielle Savio, who's a project manager at Multiplex, Danielle Pacella, an associate at JCB, and finally Atreyu Lacy, a technical director at TTW Engineers.
Look, to be honest, as the guys have said before, we came in with a lot of lessons learned, and we're leaving with a lot more lessons learned. I think in particular for us, we've had a lot of issues with the roof detailing, and that hasn't actually been from the same perspective as the design team. So the design team were dealing with a lot of different geometries and a lot of different, layers of CLT working at different heights and things like that. For us, when we got the CLT, obviously it fits together like a jigsaw, and so that wasn't so challenging. What has been a challenge is the kind of restrictions we've had around how the risers up the building, the mechanical and the hydraulic risers interfaced with the roof. We had some, design restrictions imposed on us by the building surveyor that have meant that it's been really hard for us to close up the roof. And obviously when you're building in timber, you want to try and get as watertight as possible, as quick as possible. So we certainly will look moving forward at some more we'll look harder at the detailing around the roof, and we would potentially look at finding ways to prefab anything we needed to do with regards to having that kind of inside-outside connection up on the roof, just to avoid those weak points, in our in closing up the building from a moisture perspective. And I certainly think we've still got a ways to go in terms of how we maintain the timber throughout the build. Monash itself was a really quick build from go to woe, and we kind of finished our timber structure in September. had quite a dry, warm spring and handed the building over in summer. Here we've kind of had a much longer structural build. We've been exposed a lot longer, and keeping the timber in beautiful, pristine condition is really challenging without, spending extreme amounts of money to physically cover it. So I certainly think we need to get a little, perhaps not smarter, but just more efficient or more effective in that regards moving forward.
And this just popped in my head, DS, but I understand as Multiplex made a sustainability pledge. I remember seeing you speak at a presentation late last year, and it was on this exact topic. So can you talk about what the sustainability is going forward for Multiplex and your strategy and, going towards zero carbon?
Yeah, so we have made a zero carbon pledge for 2030, and I don't want to speak out of school about how we're going to achieve that because I honestly don't know, but we've made the pledge. So I think we're certainly starting to look at how, the buildings that we own, operate, particularly we're looking at how we can, I guess, start to move towards being carbon neutral. And I certainly think we've kind of gathered a sustainability focus group in the Melbourne team who are starting to look at, how we can, I guess, influence the industry and influence the projects we work on to obviously, I guess, add value into those projects at the front end and try and maybe shape the focus for clients who are really, I guess, invested in trying to get the best sustainable solution for their project, what we can do to cater to that need, but also, I guess, also prompt or influence the decisions to move towards a more sustainable building industry. And, it's something that quite a few of us are quite passionate about within the business. And I think that if we really want to cater to our clients who really are also quite passionate about it, we need to get on board and really make a concerted effort as well to I guess, drive the industry. Multiplex is a big player, so it's kind of us to show a bit of leadership in that space.
100%. And DP, lessons learned for Latrobe.
Yeah, so like Danielle said, I guess maintaining where we've got exposed faces. So, for instance, we did learn that the lesson. Monash was a bit different because Monash we had CLT on the facade, so that closed it up quicker and was less exposed to sun and light, which does change the colour of the timber. This job we didn't. We had the facade go on the modular facade, so I guess that kind of saved it to some respect. But where we have beams exposed in the knuckle area to stop the propping marks, they put a piece of ply on before the props went on, so that just to help that. Other lessons learned. I think not saying the quality was different, but there was just a lot more panels. Therefore, there was a lot more opportunity for there to be things that might have gone wrong either, in production or in installation. So I think that's interesting, I guess, in terms of just being the scale of the building provided extra challenges. The fire and acoustics on this job, like I said, were a lot more stringent. I don't know if you can necessarily learn something if it's going to change every time. It's like there's a different set of rules for every project, which in a way is interesting. Like Atreyu said, we're learning something every time. It's really interesting. It's great that we have the opportunity to do that, but at the same time it can be really frustrating because then you don't have any economies of scale. You don't have anything that you can necessarily rely on. you can assume, hey, we did this last time, we think this will happen again. But then it's up to that particular consultant, building surveyor, engineer that you really need to be on the same plane with. And you really need to get a good team together early to get that finished product. So yeah, a lot of things were learned, but not necessarily that we can put them in our book for next time, but we don't necessarily know that we can use it. And then also, as we talked about before, Atreyu, you mentioned about, it's such a young industry. 1 minute there isn't enough products on available in Australia, and the next minute there's actually a market here. So I think the market is growing slowly, but it is growing, and that's also going to give us, a set of rules that we can, that we know in terms of instead of having to learn them every time. So.
Yeah, love it. And Atreyu.
Yeah, I think, as I said, the structural design of timber itself is pretty straightforward. The lessons and the challenges is more around the process, particularly around approvals and that sort of thing. So we certainly would walk away now with a lot more confidence around, what we know will work from an approvals perspective and where we might run into challenges, and we're able to apply those lessons, every day on our other projects. Disproportionate collapse and structural robustness, we spent a lot of studies there, and there was a pretty rigorous independent review process, and through that we were sort of a good degree of healthy challenge, and we were able to refine our analysis and that, so that's been useful. Another thing relates to like temporary works. So, we can design we provide temporary works engineering for Multiplex and work with their site team through the build, and there were some details, things like connecting alley-max back to the structure, for example, that, probably from a Multiplex's perspective were less than ideal in terms of the amount of like steel and the amount of fixings we had to put into to get some of these things to work, because a lot of those systems are really designed around conventional concrete buildings, and so alley-mac ties and that sort of thing, they're usually pretty simple. They were pretty tricky, and knowing what we know now, we'd probably approach the building in a slightly different way and perhaps try to actually isolate some zones around the building where those things are likely going to be required, and possibly look to strengthen the timber panels for those alley-macs, so you didn't have to have quite as many fixings. Mm-hmm. That's a discussion we could have with a builder, with Multiplex up front, and we didn't have that discussion up front in the design. So that was a really interesting one.
It's funny, sorry to butt in, Adam, but it's funny that Atreyu mentioned that, because we're, I guess, also like it's how you transfer the lessons learnt through projects as well. Obviously, our experience, TTW did temp works for us at Monash, and we were quite, I guess the team at Monash were quite aware that at Latrobe we would need a similar treatment for the alley-mac and things like that with steel work and all those things. But because I guess that didn't make it into the team that tended Latrobe, those allowances monetarily for that kind of connections weren't accounted for, because we're so used to pricing things like alley-macs and cranes for a concrete structure that you can forget that you need to make different allowances in a timber structure. And that goes for any kind of logistics, whether it's a scaffold or a crane base or anything, it is different, and it needs to be treated different from a time and cost perspective on a timber build.
Next, we'll be hearing from Ryan Miller, a Senior Associate Engineer at Bueler Engineers, and he'll be telling us about the 1430Q Sacramento project, which is a 6-story lightweight timber frame building on top of a 2-story concrete podium. And why was it used for the 6 stories in this case? So I understand this was pushing the boundaries. So 5 stories might be common, but 6 stories of light frame is a bit bigger than usual from where you are.
Right. Yeah, there was this project also, wanted to try to keep with the wood frame because of its familiarity. The owner was going to be able to get better bid from contractors to get a good competitive pricing on it. This project being that it went taller than the code limited 5 stories, we had to go through an AMMR, an alternate means and methods request process to be able to allow that to happen. But I think, we still wanted to try to keep wood as the main system for the residential because it was known to be a cost-effective solution.
Mm. And one of the challenges I'd imagine at this height is the stability system. So can you tell us about the stability system you designed all the way from the top of the building down to the foundations and how it transfers lateral loads? I understand is earthquake one of the big factors where you are, I'd imagine, as well?
It is, yeah. In Sacramento, the earthquake level is moderate, but we are very close to high seismic regions like San Francisco. So we do, when there's a big earthquake in the San Francisco area, it can certainly reach out to Sacramento and cause some effects. So that is our primary lateral design constraint. With the wood building up above, we wanted to keep it with wood shear walls, and there's a code limitation that would limit the height of wood shear walls to 65 feet. But as we increased this building by 1 floor, that 65 foot was exceeded as well. So what we decided to do there was we had 2 options. The first would have been to go through some laboratory testing to try to justify the taller wood shear wall system and look at the deflections and make sure all of that was going to be what we were looking for. The second option, and the one that we ended up going with, was to simply extend the concrete podium level seismic system up by 1 more floor. So what we have in a general sense now is we have 5 stories of wood shear wall on top of 3 stories of concrete shear wall.
And finally, we'll hear from the late Gary Caulfield, a former CEO at XLam Australia, who tragically and sadly passed away in 2020, an absolute legend in the industry. So great to finally hear from Gary, who was working on the Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. And this was the world's largest CLT project. As we wrap it up, I've got a final question. And we've mentioned a few different things like consolidating fire testing and having consultant and project teams have more experience. And there's a lot of different areas where there can be improvement over time. And Gary, what are your thoughts on the cost curves of massive timber as a material as we have all these improve in all these different areas simultaneously? What do you think is going to be the impact on competitiveness with the other materials?
Yeah, look, I think the cost competitive is coming down. The costs are coming down. You're starting to see, I think, costs coming down because in a free market there is more competition, which is good. So that will automatically drive costs down. When Australia has CLTP Burnley up and running, Red Stag in New Zealand up and running, all of a sudden we've gone from one manufacturer to 3 or 4 people of a larger size. That will drive costs down. We're also seeing more and more buildings coming along, and we're also seeing more and more larger buildings coming along as well, and that drives the cost down. The standard detailing drives the cost down. So I would suggest we're depends who you ask, of course. But if we ask the concrete guys, they'll say we're dearer. If you ask a timber person, they'll say we're cheaper. I think the harsh reality is we're still a few percent behind, but I would suggest we're a few percent behind because the material is still misunderstood, and some of the late adopters coming onto the scene are not using the material as efficiently as it should. A quick example, Housing New Zealand, the New Zealand government's social housing arm, Kiangaora, embarked on a CLT 3-story walk-up pilot project that I kicked off with them a number of years ago. Roughly 12 buildings. The cost for the 12th building is vastly different from the cost for the first. And the prerequisite for this was that it had to meet the square metre rate for the traditional build. Granted, we have moved from a full mass timber solution, all walls and all floors, through to a hybrid solution. CLT floors, CLT spine walls, bathroom pods, and closed panel walls. But as I said at the very beginning to you, the client is using the right material in the right place at the right price. And it was XLam's suggestion to not use CLT in certain places to get the building more efficient and drive the cost down. That's the right advice as a mass timber supplier you should be giving your client. And that has driven the cost down for that building. The minute the client starts to chop and change that material mix, his cost will go up because each material will start to be used inefficiently. So that's a very good example. I think Kiangora will be releasing some case study information on that to the market quite soon, and that'll be good for it. That'll be good for everybody. The 3-story walk-up is a very popular product in both Australia, New Zealand, and the US. So it continues to be used more and more. I think there is one last point I would make, Adam. There's lots of information out there. It must always amaze you, as it always amazes me, how many people don't engage with Wood Solutions, or don't engage with Woodworks, or don't engage with Trada, or don't engage with Innovatech in New Zealand. There's lots of information out there. In fact, use the information. It's how you learn about the material and how you drive your costs down to become efficient, ultimately. The last point, I think we're coming into an area where that carbon discussion and the carbon topic has possibly been something that just sits to the side, that nobody wants to know about, over to the left, on the shelf getting dusty. However, our TO50 obligations are fast approaching. Every year it becomes closer. That right mix of material will help us achieve that. I have this concept that if we can swap all the floors in a building for timber, it may let you use concrete somewhere else, where concrete is the best material to be used, because you get all that solid mass in all the floors. So got to start thinking about that carbon equation and what does mass timber let you do elsewhere in the building? Because none of us would profess that 100% timber building is the right building. It sits on concrete foundations. It's joined by steel. Has to be the harmonious use of the product. Let's see where that carbon discussion takes us in the uptake of timber in the right place.
100%. Thanks for everyone tuning in for this Best Of series where we looked at the case studies in the archives of the Wood Solutions Timber Talks podcast. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, whether you be listening on iTunes or wherever you might be finding it on the podcatcher of your choice. And remember, this year we've also got the Wood Solutions webinars, which again is going to be on Tuesdays, but differently this year. It's going to be fortnightly and not weekly. So subscribe to the Wood Solutions email newsletter and you won't miss a thing.